going on, ladies and gentlemen? It's the one and only James Williams, Dark Waters of the Dark Waters channel. Now, first of all, if you're a first-time listener, I would like to thank you for being here with me, and I want to manage your expectations. My interviews are probably unlike everybody else's interviews where they let their guests just sit there and talk. I pride myself on using my interviews as networking sessions. So you're going to hear a lot of laughter, a lot of joking, a lot of stupid, crazy comments. But I promise you, we're going to stick to the business of what's going on and getting information out to you. My guest today is Lyle Blackburn. Now, the gentleman needs no introduction. He's a living legend in the field of cryptids. Anybody who tries to dispute that, bro, just go jump off a bridge and tie like a center block around your neck, because it would be insane for you to try and dispute that. And I'm excited to have him here with us on the Dark Waters channel to start talking about not only Bigfoot, we might get into Dogman. I definitely want to get into the vomit. And just to lay out the conversation for you guys, we're going to have some fun. With that being said, Lyle, thank you. Welcome to the channel, my brother. And I'm excited to hold this conversation with you. How are you today?
I'm pretty good. Thanks for having me.
Man, I really appreciate you, bro. Now, Lyle, I like to start the conversation by walking through some things and getting to know people. So let's go here. I'm thinking, let's talk about your, how you got into this field, but not from the perspective of, I saw the encounter on this day. Because what I've discovered is that most people who've come into this field of cryptids, they've either had one or two scenarios play out, right? When they were a child, their family was into this. Like mom and dad believed in Bigfoot. They didn't prohibit them from having like strange and weird views, or they had an encounter with something in their early years between ages, 9 and most likely 16. And then there's people who come into the field because they saw things going on. They was inspired to come into the field, and then they took a position and they started learning. Which category do you fall in? Were you brought into this at an early age based on an experience or an encounter, or was it in your later years where you just were inspired and you said, man, I really want to get involved in this?
Well, it wasn't from an encounter, but I was into it at a young age, and it was just, I think it was because I gravitated towards monsters. I just loved horror movies and things, and then I loved mysteries, unsolved mysteries. And when I was in third grade, I got a book called Strange But True, and that introduced me to stories of Bigfoot, Yeti, and Loch Ness Monster. And so, I'm already all up into monster stuff, and I'm thinking, oh man, this is like people seeing, real life monsters. And so that really just kind of captured my imagination. And, just at that point, I just got whatever books I could find from the library. And then, of course, began to see shows like In Search Of and the movie The Legend of Boggy Creek, and, just create a lifelong interest. And I had also spent a lot of time with my father hunting and things in Texas and Arkansas. And, so I was familiar with wooded areas. So it just all kind of gelled for me as far as, outdoors and the potential of seeing something unknown.
All right, I want to play a game with you real quick. I'm going to count to 3, right? We'll go 1, 2, 3. And then we both going to say our favorite horror movie when we were a child at the same time. You ready? You got yours in your mind?
Yeah.
1, 2, 3. Silver Bullet.
Creature from the Black Lagoon.
Okay, Creature from the Black Lagoon, Silver Bullet. We might have a little bit of an age difference going on here. Bro, I remember when Silver Bullet came out with that freaking werewolf and the dude being on the wheelchair. And, bro, that was so freaking horrifying. And then it made the priest the freaking werewolf. Bro, that was freaking horrifying, man. It was absolutely horrifying. So, guys, here we go. We pulled a little something out of Lyle. We know his favorite horror movie as a kid. We're making some progress here, ladies and gentlemen. All right, Lyle. So you come into the field. You take interest in the field, and then where did you start? Was it you started off like out boots on the ground? You started off like your first adventure into this research. Do you recall what was the very first thing you did, or your very first investigation? Do you still remember that?
Well, ironically, it started with sort of a ghost interest, and other than just observing, I'm out in the woods or hunting or whatever. I mean, I was always sort of like kept my eyes open, but I wasn't, I wasn't sort of mounting an expedition. But when I was in high school, and my interest, as I said, were just sort of mysterious and spooky things, unknown things. And so I remember going to a graveyard with my girlfriend at the time, and her parents had a cabin out on a lake here in Texas, and very wooded and secluded area. And there was an old graveyard there, so we took a cassette recorder down there and just turned it on and put it on some graves, sort of like early ghost investigation. So really, as far as paranormal, that would be the first time I did any sort of like, I'm going to investigate type things.
Did y'all get anything? Did y'all capture anything on the recording?
Well, there was some interesting stuff, I think, as I can recall. I mean, I didn't, I don't even know where those tapes are, but, you hear weird stuff, and it wasn't, shocking or definitive, but I mean, there was some spooky stuff that kind of was on the tape. So it was always sort of like, well, what could that be?
Nah, man, that's how it is. So in my old neighborhood in New Orleans East, right off Bayou Savage, bro, we used to go into the woods and play because New Orleans is pretty much all swamp. And the neighborhood I grew up in, was built on swamps. Like people put stilts in the ground and then they built houses on top of them, and it was swamps. Man, I remember going into the woods, crossing over the levee, and they had this one path that led you off into Bayou Savage, and we would get back up in there. You talking about alligators? 11-foot long alligators, 12-foot long alligators. We just kids just being retarded, right? And we would get back into those woods, Lyle, and it would be 90 degrees outside, and then you'll walk into this cold spot. I mean, just 90 degrees, you walk into 70 degrees, 60 degrees air, and we would play around in a cold spot and do stupid stuff, not knowing, we thought it was like, oh, it's cool in this area, we're going to play in this area, right? Just dumb children. Bro, one time we are in one of those cool spots, and tree limbs start snapping. We thought we heard an alligator growling. It was me and my friend Daryl Berry. I'll never forget this. We called him Lil Daryl. In the hood, the people got names like Lil. They called him Lil Daryl, bro. And I was kind of chubby, and he was faster than me. Phenomenal athlete, bro. Like, dude was just super athlete, just crazy. Dude takes off running, man, leaves me up in there, and my little fat behind is wobbling, trying to catch up with him. And luckily, him being a friend, he slowed down. Was like, "Come on, man, we got to get out of here. We got to get out of here." And bro, that was one of my earliest experiences in Bayou Savage, man. But looking back on it now, I realize it could have been a Bigfoot, it could have been a Dogman, it could have been anything. But as a kid, bro, you just wilding out, running around, doing crazy stuff, and that's what we did. Lyle, let's swing over to this. So you got a book that just came out. It's called the Texas Bigfoot book. And how many books have you published altogether? I know it's quite a few, right?
Let's see. I believe this is number 8.
That's a lot of books. Walk us through what my listeners can expect when they go out and purchase this book. What are they going to be experiencing when they're reading this?
Well, the kind of approach I take on these books is that I try to encompass the history of sightings and encounters and legends of whatever creature it is. So in this case, Texas, which is a pretty big state. So obviously, there's a lot of ground to cover there. And so, I just research various ways to find whatever mentions and legends and old newspaper items there are that suggest a history of creatures such as Bigfoot. And then as I go forward, I reference some of the more dramatic or famous encounters that have been publicized in some way, and then that's interspersed with my own observations, especially here as growing up in Texas and traveling throughout the state, and looking into this, and first person interviews. So people I've interviewed personally that have had what I consider credible encounters. So it really builds the whole case for Texas Bigfoot. Is this something that is potentially out there? And Texas isn't a state that nobody really thinks about Bigfoot being in Texas, but there is a long history of encounters. And the particular thing about Texas is people don't really realize, if they're not from here, you kind of picture this sort of a cowboy landscape, and certainly parts of Texas are like that. But in the eastern portion, it is very heavily wooded. It's called the Piney Woods, and then it goes down to the Gulf Coast area. There's swamps. I mean, there's everything. So there is habitat that's conducive to these creatures, and there is a long history of just really fascinating and dramatic encounters. So the book just covers all of that.
Yeah, and that is a huge misconception with Texas. When I first came into this and I gave my number out publicly, I would get phone calls from Texas, especially like East Texas along the Sabine River area on the opposite, on the border of Louisiana and Texas. And
Mm-hmm.
I was getting calls from both sides of the border. And it was overwhelmingly Bigfoot calls. And then I don't know what happened. All of a sudden, it was just like every call turned into Dogman, but it was overwhelming Bigfoot calls. Like Port Arthur, Texas had a whole bunch of Bigfoot encounters there. And those were black folks in Port Arthur seeing Bigfoot, but it's hard to get black folks to talk about the paranormal. And I've been trying to work on that, but when they do talk, it's absolutely insane, the stories that I hear. But Texas is chock full of encounters. Now, let me ask you this question. This is something from my own knowledge. So we got East Texas, we got West Texas. We got literally two different environments, right? When you get out to the west side of Texas, what kind of encounters are you getting? Bigfoot encounters from over in that area? What are you getting out there?
Surprisingly, there are some, and as you move from the piney woods of the east, like you say, Sabine River, just tons of stuff, and then in the central portion, you find a lot of sort of older history, like encounters in the 60s and 70s in those areas when they were probably less populated. You go all the way to the west, and there are some interesting cases, such as the Horizon City monster, which is Horizon City is just right outside of El Paso, and certainly not what you would think Bigfoot territory. And there's some history there of encounters, but they do kind of fall into a stranger realm where the creature, a couple of people said it sort of disappeared into the desert landscape, and just it almost seemed a little more paranormal than just sort of big ape-like creature in the woods. So those add the flavor to the variety of what you're seeing. And even up in the panhandle, that's just sort of Amarillo, where it's just wide open, there is some really spooky stuff where in one case there were some guys riding motorcycles. There was three of them, and they were driving along in the evening, and something ran out in the road. The first guy sort of saw it. The second guy had to swerve to miss it, and the third guy nearly hit it. So you had three guys who distinctly saw this hairy hominoid thing run into the road. And how do you explain that? I mean, it's out there in the middle of nowhere, yet they had a Bigfoot encounter. So it's just some really fascinating stuff.
Awesome sauce. Let's chop it up on this because this question just popped into my mind. Again, I'm learning from you, bro. So no gotcha questions. So don't take anything that way. I've been in this for a while, and you're a very established author. You're an established figure. How do you deal with the perceptions that people who don't necessarily believe in Bigfoot, Dogman, and cryptids, when you're greeted by those preconceived notions? For example, like I don't know if you have family members who know what you do, but they don't believe in what you do. They're like, yeah, he's into this, but this weird, freaky stuff. How do you deal with that when you encounter that? Because your name is epically huge when it comes to this. So you had to have run into this problem before. How do you work your way around that, or do you just not care? How do you deal with that?
Well, in some aspect, I just simply don't care. I do what I do and enjoy it. And there's plenty of people who, like yourself, we can discuss these topics and explore them with open minds. But anybody that I meet that may be skeptical, nobody really gives me a hard time. But I try to meet them halfway. You have to understand that people that don't haven't studied it as much or looked into it have just those preconceived notions and just sort of gut reaction as to what they believe, or fear that if they say they like Bigfoot or something, that people will laugh. So I try to understand that, say, yeah, I totally get it. it does seem like something that that is far out there. But then I'll kind of roll in I say, well, check out this. There was a deputy sheriff in Georgia that came across these tracks, and he was skeptical, but he cast these tracks, and I'll just point out an example that I think is just very easy to understand and that has a lot of credibility. And like, oh yeah, or and you usually get people that kind of say, well, one time I was in the woods and, or my cousin I think he might have seen one. And then they kind of warm up because I think people are afraid that you're going to laugh at them they're not used to people who have an open mind. So, I just try to meet people halfway and understand that there's skepticism and a lot of it's just from ignorance. And I don't try to beat people over the head and say, you got to believe in this stuff. It's more like, hey, here's the case for it. I've laid it out, or I'll throw you some examples. You're free to make up your own mind. That's totally cool.
And that is awesome advice. The reason why I wanted you to answer that question is because we have a significant number of people in these audiences who find themselves in that similar situation. They have an interest in cryptids, right? They want to talk and share and build relationships and just be able to express themselves, and they find themselves flooding to content providers like myself and books and things of that nature in order to kind of feed that urge and that need. But I want people to understand how a professional actually deals with those situations when they're dealing with family members and friends and skeptics, because it's important overall for the field itself that we know how to handle those conversations and those encounters with family. Because the more people have a greater understanding of this, I think it's better. Because if you go out into these woods and you're not familiar with what's out in the woods and you run into something, man, you can end up getting yourself hurt because you just purely out of ignorance, you don't know what's going on, and people need to know and understand what's going on. That's why I asked that question, and I'm glad you took the time to answer it. Now, next thing, ladies and gentlemen, Lyle has a lot of events that he's involved in. Lyle, what's this event you got coming up in October?
Yeah, there's actually a Texas Bigfoot conference, and I'm usually a guest at that, or a featured presenter each year, and that's in Jefferson, Texas, so way over in the thick of the piney woods in East Texas. And it's a fun one because the environment out there is just really beautifully scenic with Caddo Lake, and the Texas Bigfoot Conference, just features various speakers and presenters that educate about Bigfoot, or like myself. For this year, I would kind of concentrate on the history of Texas Bigfoot in the state, and that's always a fun event. So, these events, I do a lot of these events, and, while I go in the field and I do research and I do all that other stuff, I do like to get together at these events because, you can share ideas with like-minded individuals. You can have fun with the subject matter, and, it's a social environment as well as a place to learn. And I'd say I've gotten a lot of really good encounters by being at these conferences, because you can then speak to the person right there, in person. You can judge their credibility, their all of that stuff, as opposed to, you get an email from somebody and you call them up and you interview them. It's like, when you're in person, you can really get a sense about what the person saw and the possibilities of it. So yeah, I enjoy these conferences.
All right, Lyle, let me pull out my crowbar. Let's walk backwards a little bit. Um, Take me back to your first time at a conference. The emotions you felt. What was the first conference that you ever spoke at? How did that come about? How did you feel going into that environment? Because you're a veteran now. Take me back to when you were a rookie. What was that first conference that you went to?
Right. I remember, well, the first Bigfoot conference I went to was actually a Texas Bigfoot conference. And I remember when podcasts were really new, and, I'm totally into this subject and stuff. And I started like realizing you could get digital content like a podcast. And I found one about Sasquatch, and I'm like, wow, people are talking about this. Like, And so I'm listening, going, this is amazing, because before the internet, you were a little more out of touch with like-minded individuals. You know what I mean? It was like you're all into it, but not your friends. But some people are into it, and so they mentioned that there was a conference coming up in East Texas. So I went to that, and I was just like, I couldn't believe it. I mean, it was like vendors with Bigfoot stuff, and I met Lauren Coleman, which is one of my all-time sort of idols as far as authors in this field, and Smokey Crabtree, who was in the original Legend of Boggy Creek movie. And so that's when I was starting to want to write my book, which my first book was The Beast of Boggy Creek. And so within a year, I had immersed myself with these people who were into that research. And I think the very next year, I was actually a speaker before my book had even come out. But I was speaking about this legendary case of Boggy Creek. And yeah, I was nervous, and I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And just amazed that they would allow me a platform to speak when I'm around peers like Lauren Coleman and Jeff Meldrum and Bob Gimlin from the famous Patterson Gimlin film. I'm like, how did I even get here? It was amazing. And I don't know, crazy.
Nah, bro, that's I love asking those questions because you can hear the excitement in people's voices when they relive those moments. Man, that's beautiful. I was talking to Michael Cook. Michael Cook was just recently on These Woods Are Haunted like a couple of days ago, and he was talking. And Mike is so funny because you can tell he's smoking a cigarette while we're talking, and I think he cracked the beer open. And he was like, "Well, Dark Waters, I don't even consider myself to be a celebrity." I'm like, "Bro, you're a freaking celebrity." He's like, "I'm a normal guy." I'm like, "Nah, bro, you're a celebrity." And it's funny to me how for me it was weird when I went to Comic Con and all these people came in and it was like, "Yeah, man, you're Dark Waters." I'm like, "Nah, bro, I'm just a dude from New Orleans, and it just so happened to be in my hometown. If it wasn't in my hometown, homie, I wouldn't even be here." You know what I'm saying? And
Right.
but it's weird. It really is a weird experience. It's humbling. It really is humbling and it's terrifying, but it's really a weird experience, man. And I like to ask that question to people because that's how I know if you're just a normal guy, bro. If you're just a normal guy who's out here doing this and it hasn't gone to people's head, a normal guy is just like, "Yo, bro, I was just shocked." You know what I'm saying? And that's why I ask those questions. All right, let's move on.
Right.
Let me stop
And I
digging into.
will say that, when a newspaper interviews me or something, and then the next thing they print, Bigfoot expert comment, I'm like, oh my God, I'm just another person who's researching. I'm no more expert than the next guy. Uh, but it's like you're thinking, man, I'm just a dude, who loves this subject. And a lot of times your perception, people have a perception of you, but it's great because I'm just a regular dude.
Nah, man, that's how it is, man. That's how it is. But I'm happy to hear that. I love to hear the excitement in your voice, and you can tell you got passion for it, and that's what I try to maintain while doing this is the passion and the enjoyment of it. Because as long as it's fun and it's something that you enjoy, you can deal with all the rest of the stuff that comes along with it, and you can get information to people. I mean, you can really get information out to people. So you started with the Legend of Boggy Creek. So take me back to that. Now here's where I fall short, Lyle. So like historical encounters, I've never been a researcher of that. You know what I'm saying? So like the Boggy Creek monster, I know about it. I've seen a movie about it. If you ask me to point out Boggy Creek on a map, I wouldn't be able to point it out to you because I got into the game and I started focusing on people and their encounters because that's my strong suit. Now, a lot of people have heard about this, but walk us back through that for those people who are new who don't know anything about it. Just a quick synopsis of what year it happened, where it was, where exactly it is, and what the events were.
Right. So the Legend of Boggy Creek case was made famous by a movie called The Legend of Boggy Creek, which came out in 1972. And Boggy Creek is in southwest Arkansas near the small town of Fouke, right near Texarkana. So it's right on the border of Texas, Louisiana, and Arkansas. Um, So around the year 1971, there was some reports. People had encounters and rather frightening encounters with a upright, 7 foot tall, hair covered, ape like, man like beast. And those started getting newspaper coverage, and it brought a lot of attention on that little town of Fouke. And at the time, and we were talking about 1971, people in southern Arkansas or anything down here, they did not think Bigfoot. It was more like monster. And so they called it the Fouke monster. And then when the movie came out, it kind of became known as the Boggy Creek monster. So, it was almost like it was just some thing and not really equated to Bigfoot, so to speak. Those encounters, the publicity of them and all that, as they began to be published in the paper, a lot of old timers came forward and said, well, this thing has been seen down here for years. And so that kind of added to the credibility that something was there. And then when a would-be director, Charles B. Pierce, made that movie and released it in 72, it was kind of in that budding golden era of the paranormal, and especially Bigfoot. This was, 5 years after the famous Patterson-Gimlin film had been filmed, and it did enormously well. The movie was a huge sensation and made millions and millions of dollars in the 70s, so it was a big deal. And I saw it when I was really young at a drive-in, and that was one of the things that influenced me further into this research, and it influenced many of the other sort of old school Bigfooters. So as I was in my adult phase of kind of getting into this and investigating and doing, looking to write a book, that was something I wanted to know because it was based on a true story. But I said, what was the true story? I mean, here's this movie that was a sensation about a Southern Bigfoot. But really what's the truth behind it? So that's what set me on that path. And then I discovered that not only were those encounters dramatized in the movie quite credible, but there had been encounters all along, ongoing, and even into modern times, where people were continuing to see some creature down there on the outskirts of this small town. So that kind of, obviously made a great subject for a book. And once that came out, that kind of just really launched me, because a short time later, I got a call from Monsters and Mysteries in America, and then I was on Finding Bigfoot, because they were covering that the Legend of Boggy Creek case. So I just it was a good timing, I guess, for me. And so I think it's one of the center points of just sort of historical Bigfoot in the South, and one that I think needed a book written on it.
And that was your very first book. And what was the book title again, so people can go check it out?
It's called The Beast of Boggy Creek.
All right, ladies and gentlemen. So you can get Lyle's first book, The Beast of Boggy Creek, and get where he started. And then you can buy the most recent book, which is the Texas Bigfoot book. And you can figure out where he's at now with all of his research. Thank you for the education, because like I said, honestly, I'm just being truthful. I haven't looked into the historical aspect of it from that perspective, but you answered my next question, because I was trying to figure out how that played in with the Bob Gimlin film, and you made the pieces to the puzzle fit. And the significant thing to me is that they called it a monster. The eyewitnesses called it a monster, right? Even now, when I find an eyewitness who is not aware of Bigfoot, is not aware of Dogman, they don't know anything, they call it a monster. They'll call and they'll be like, DW, I got a monster in my backyard, or my friend told me to call you and I've been seeing this monster. And then they'll start describing it, but they say it's a monster, and then it goes into the description of it had, pointy ears, or it had, a big snout, or it had like a wide nose, it looked like a man with hair. It's a monster. And I think for every eyewitness that encounters something like this, that they have no previous context, like a bucket in their mind to place this in, it's just purely a monster. You know what I'm saying? And it's the most terrifying and frightening thing that they could ever encounter.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Because like somebody sees what we would define as a dog man. Well, people, just your average person may not know that there's sightings of werewolf-like creatures and wouldn't know to call it that. They, like you say, it's just like, I saw this scary thing. And even down in your area, the famous Honey Island swamp monster out of Honey Island, there closer to Slidell, east of New Orleans. There's the name. It's the Honey Island swamp monster, and it's kind of a Bigfooty, dogmanish kind of deal. But legends and stuff, just especially in the South, used different localized names, and that's always really fascinated me because you can look at different states, and I kind of specialize in the South because that's where I am, and just what the localized name for a Bigfoot is, and how that plays in with people who were seeing things that didn't know where they fit in sort of a greater cryptozoological catalog, such as, is it a Bigfoot, is it a lizard man or a dog man? It just was some creepy thing, and that's what they described it as.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Let's circle to State Line, Mississippi. Let me tell you this. So, I get a call, Lyle, from these two brothers, and this was what introduced me to the stuff that happened in State Line, Mississippi. They call me. They like, listen, we want to tell you a story about what happened on our family property, right? Their mother would keep them away from their grandfather's house. She just wouldn't let them go there. The grandfather dies. They decide they're gonna go renovate the house because they want to sell it and make money. They start painting the house. The two brothers are in the house alone painting. The big roller brush with the long handle, long stick. They're painting. The brother starts to paint this one wall, and as he's painting the wall, the paint rolls onto this figure of this creature with a moon pie head, remember how the McDonald's had the moon pie man with the chin and the head like a moon? Literally rolls the paint on this moon pie headed creature, but it's standing sideways where he can see the moon pie head, right? Freaks out, runs out of the house, leaves his brother in the house, don't tell his brother nothing. Just runs out. The brother turns around, sees it moving towards him, tries to run out of the house. The thing grabs him, yanks him down, tries to pull him back into the house. The brother comes in, grabs the other brother. They go outside. They call their mom. Their mom starts to explain to them all the stuff that's going on, right? So I'm talking to these dudes, and I'm like, yo, this is wow. This is crazy. This is insane stuff. Well, weeks pass, and I say, look, hook me up with some other people in State Line because they're telling me how crazy things are in State Line, Mississippi. I end up talking to this guy who's out with his grandfather, and they get a flat tire on the side of the road, bro, and they called it the vomit. Changing the tire on the side of the road, and he said the way he described it because he was a kid when his grandfather was literally an upright walking alligator. It looked like an alligator walking upright, long tail, alligator head, and he said it didn't walk fast. It kind of lumbered and like it stumbled and moved forward as it crossed the road. And so I wanted to give you that description because I know you've researched lizard man and see if that kind of fit in the criteria of what the descriptions that people have given you of lizard man is. Does that fall anywhere in the range of it, or how does that compare?
Yes, it does. There's kind of a two different sort of descriptions of this humanoid reptilians, and some of them are more humanoid, not so much like an elongated snout and has no tail or anything like that. It's just simply a scaly humanoid. And then there's some that are more like what you're describing there that seem more like, people say it's like an upright bipedal alligator type thing. So I've gotten reports that are almost dead on what you're talking about. Some in Texas. You've got some reports from Mississippi. There's some in Florida. And then I had done a book on the Bishopville lizard man case out of South Carolina, which was one that was heavily publicized and sort of represents the one with the most sort of, I guess, content to it, as far as one of these lizard man type creatures. And, I'm kind of fascinated with those because I kind of always loved the sort of I don't know, swamp monster or that sort of creature from a Black Lagoon vibe. And what you're talking about certainly has that. And I mean, this is scary stuff, really.
No, it's terrifying because so you got the one that looks like an alligator that's slow, and then the other descriptions I've got from people have been. You remember the movie V? Not the recent movie, like the old school television show V, where they had the spaceships over the planet and people were peeling off their skin and they look like lizards. I've had people who
Mm-hmm.
call me with that exact same description, but they're not referencing the movie. And then I say, okay, let me go look and pull up this movie and send it to them. And they'd be like, yeah, that's what I saw. That looks exactly like it. And it seems like that version is 10 times more malicious than this freaking alligator that's walking around, like this hybrid alligator. It seems like that version, that the skin peeling version, is way more malicious and way more intelligent than this other version. And that freaks me out. Out of all the things, bro, that I've heard people talk to me about, the freaking lizard men freak me out, and then I call it the night of hell. I don't even want to talk about it, but that I'm not going to talk about that because I'm not about to be bothered with the stuff that happens when you talk about that. But the lizard man and the other thing freak me out more than anything, man. It's terrifying. What have you heard over all these years? I mean, what's the worst thing that you've heard that made you be like, bruh, I don't know if I want to deal with this anymore. Like, I don't, you know, this is too much for me.
Well, I mean, I'm not generally fearful of things in a way, but certainly there's there's not only been some encounters where people have seemed very credible people have told me about things that definitely I wouldn't want to experience myself, in terms of like some Bigfoot attacks and some Dogman type encounters, really spooky stuff. And then, there's been a few times I'm out researching, and one time in particular, I was in a swampy area, paddling in a canoe. It was like midnight, and we're me and my research partner out there, and suddenly this thing starts howling, and sort of the reality sets in. You're like, we're out hunting monsters, and then suddenly you hear something you can't identify. And between myself and my research partner had years of experience in woods and wildlife, and we're like, that is not anything normal, and it sounds like what people report as Bigfoot howls or whatever. And eventually we paddled back, and the thing had apparently followed us. And as soon as we got the canoe out and got up on the hill in the swampy area where our tent was, it started howling at us from right where we got out of the water. And so those are the times where you're like, this isn't a book, this isn't a movie, this isn't a podcast, this is actual reality. We're out here in the middle of nowhere. Nobody even knows where we are because it's sort of off the grid. Yeah, you just sort of say, well, you sort of question a moment, what the hell am I doing?
Bro, trust me, I know. There's this lady who called me recently. Name was Robin. She was talking about she started sending my team all these photos of things she was capturing around her house and videos. Right? I'm talking about terrifying stuff, like stuff that's purely demonic, but then stuff that's manifested into like shadows with horns on top of the head, and then like video where you see the shadow, you see the horns go on top of the head, then you see it manifesting and turning into flesh, right? And she's like, I need help, I need spiritual help, I need prayer. So we go through the whole process of getting her squared away and telling her, listen, sweetheart, it's very important that you stop sharing these photos. And then she starts calling in the middle of the night, team members in the middle of the night, sharing more photos, panicking. And we're saying, listen, darling, you got to understand, you can't keep sharing these photos because when you share these photos, bad things happen. Bro, this is last night, bro. I'll go to bed, wake up, I got a headache. I come out, smoke me a cigar, and I'm walking out the door, and I look over to the left, and there's this giant shadow standing next to a tree. I mean, just huge shadow, like 14-foot tall shadow, standing next to a tree. So I'm sitting there smoking a cigar. I look, and I'm like, "Hey, homie, like, I don't know what you're doing over here, but I'm gonna need you to leave." and I just turn around and come back in the house because I do a lot of prayer to hedge this household. There's a reason why I was across the street as opposed to in the house. But bro, to me, it's terrifying because um, you can talk to a person that's dealing with something, and because you're butting into that business of that covenant that that person has with that spiritual being, it says, okay, you visiting, you dealing in my business, let me come check out and see what's going on with you. And that's some of the scariest things that go on with me, man. It's like, oh, you want to know what's going on over here with her? Let me come check you out and see what you got going, see what you're working with. And it's crazy, bro. I mean, it's absolutely freaking crazy. All right, so we have hit on the lizard man. Lyle, everybody named Mama gonna be mad if we don't get into Dogman. So let's briefly touch on the subject of the upright walking canine, probably the most popular cryptid at this point in time, the Dogman, the one and only Dogman. Um, I know you've done significant amounts of research on this, and I know you've done some field research. So let's touch on some of the field research you've done, and what would you say was the closest you've gotten to one of these creatures?
Well, there was once where I was in in an area. It was in Texas, and we do have dogman encounter reports here. And I was near a graveyard again, and there was something I could not quite see. That was it after dark, and it had this very deep growl. Uh, I never actually saw it, but after the fact, it was sort of like I just couldn't understand what would be out there. It didn't seem like a dog. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a coyote or anything usual. It was pretty scary at the time, enough to the only time I've just sort of ran out back to my truck and got the heck out of there. Um, Now, I can't say it was a dog man, but I either like to think or fear to think that that's what it was. But uh, yeah, dog man is a subject that I've noticed. I've been doing this quite a while, and early on, I never got any reports about dogman. I didn't hear much about it. It was just sort of like the Vista Bray Road and some of the older, regionalized cases and a few legends and what have you, that would pop up. And then I've seen in the last 5 years, it's just exploded to where there's just dogman encounters everywhere, which I don't know whether it just means that people were seeing these things and not knowing where and how, or not wanting to report them, or if they're just running amok now. But there's certainly plenty of witnesses, and I've interviewed firsthand witnesses that I've interviewed that have very extremely credible encounters with these creatures. So there's something to it, and something that's quite, frightening, actually.
Yeah, I'll tell you. I think it's a combination of a couple of things that's going on. So if we imagine buckets in front of us, right? On the left hand side, we got a bucket. That bucket is eyewitness encounters that are that where the witnesses are not aware of what they're seeing, right? Those are kind of hard to come by because that witness has to come in contact with somebody, and they go through the process of seeing something. It scares them enough. They go out and they find, try. They're seeking for answers, and then from seeking for answers, they filter through all these different channels, and they'll reach a Lyle, or they'll reach a me, or they'll reach a like a Vic Cundiff, or a let's like Josh Turner, right? So you run into some of those people. So they filter into the process of someone talking about it. Then, and that's a valid bucket because they're going to come through one of these valid doorways. Then there's this bucket where I call it like the monetization of Dogman, right? And so it's people who just monetize it, meaning creepypasta stories and things of that nature. So they monetize it, and that bucket right there conflates with the bucket of the people whose encounters are coming in. So it makes it seem as if it's blown up and it's kind of gone, freaking exponential. But if you focus on the right bucket, then you'll know you really can track the data and see how many real encounters there are. But you have to have a mind to sit there and say, okay, Where's the source coming from? How valid is the source? Boom, 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 and then pull out the data. So it's exploded, but not as much as people think it has, because then there's this other bucket where it's just full of just content that's being created. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it just conflates the issue and it makes it seem like it's much bigger than what it is. I When we talked to this gentleman out of Florida, Blue, the various Stubbs is his real name. He's the one that caught it in his backyard on Facebook Live. He has one of the most prolific dogman photos that I've ever seen. You see the eyes, you see the snout, you see the ears, you see the shoulders, you see everything because it's just standing there in the shadows watching him, bro. And then what I loved about his encounter was you get to witness the full breadth of his emotions that he experiences after having the encounter. Like you see him slam the door, you see him freak out, you see him start praying, you see him looking for validation. Did you guys see this? Am I going crazy? You see him get confirmation from his friends on Facebook that he's not crazy. Then you see his mind coming and settling into the fact that there's a monster outside, and now he's trying to figure out what to do. And I think that's amazing. When you very few times you see somebody go through the whole process as an eyewitness live on camera. You're familiar with this process. You know what I'm talking about. It's like the process of accepting what just happened to you. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, precisely. Yep. And I think you're on point about how the intersection of people monetizing and these stories and it's just sort of everywhere. But when you distill it down to, okay, here's the number of people that that have credible encounters that have now come forward. Though that's what counts, and that's the data that can be put in as legit. And then there's a lot of anything that becomes popular, even if some amount of witnesses come forward, then like you say, then there's creepypastas and it inspires all this other stuff. So it's a popular subject, but it's one that still has the credibility of a base of witnesses that have encountered something that we just can't quite explain, but something that is there in some form.
And that's why I think that the topic of Dogman is not going to go anywhere. Well, I know it's not going to go anywhere. I know it's going to keep growing because as you continuously have these real eyewitness encounters, there's always this, I call it like a source for people who want to write stories and write books. It's a source for people to pull from to create other content, and that's how life works. There's this one thing, and it's a source, and people pull from that source. So as long as that source is rolling strong, that base foundation is strong, people are going to constantly pull from it, and it's going to constantly have content growing. So I don't see it going anywhere at all, and I don't want it to go anywhere. All right, we almost at the end of this interview, Lyle, and like we talked about earlier, I want you to hit me with something, man. Surprise me with some kind of cryptid or some kind of monster that's off the beaten path that maybe nobody knows about, that you've encountered or you heard about.
Yeah, and there are those where, like you say, we got the buckets, we got the categories, there's things that fit, we classify. Then there are those reports you get that just don't quite fit, I suppose. And I can think of several of them, and those usually are kind of creepy just because you don't know what they are. But I had a witness, well, I'd say a couple of them that sort of generally fit into this category of what I call a puckwudgie, which is a smaller, diminutive, maybe a 3-foot tall humanoid thing that somewhat hairy, not a Bigfoot, but somewhat hairy, sort of, I don't know, I don't want to make it sound comical like an evil gnome, but something in the realm of, it looks extraterrestrial, it looks like Gollum is what comes to mind, from the Lord of the Rings. I've had a couple of those reports where I find the person to be credible that said they saw one of these golem-looking things in wooded areas. And, like I said, pukwudgie is an old term from Native American Algonquin tribes that had stories about these tricksters up in the Northeast. And so that's the best way I can classify it, but they still defy sort of a classification. But it's this sort of golem-looking thing that's infinitely strange, and in some cases they've tried to speak to the witness in a kind of a broken, sort of like they're trying to say words in English, but there's just an interpretation that goes on. You can't quite say what language. Those were pretty creepy, and some that like I say, are kind of few and far between, but are something of a category of this strange creature that we can't quite define.
Yeah, so basically saying Smeagol is out here running around in the streets looking for a ring. Talking about my precious. Y'all better be careful, man, because he's looking for his precious. He running around looking for his precious, man. That's all I'm saying. If I'm not mistaken, that might be the same thing as the Stegini that some of the Native American tribes down here talk about. Sometimes they have hair, other times they don't have hair, but the one thing that they do have are glowing green eyes in the middle of the night in the dark, and those are terrifying things that people don't need to be messing with. I probably shouldn't even said the name because that's how crazy that stuff gets. That's horrific. All right, Lyle, man, we're running up on the end of this, bro. First of all, let me say I had fun talking with you, bro. I love getting to know people, and I like to get to know people in this format where we really talk about their lives, their encounters, and what they're doing. So let's do this. You're a very popular guy. Anybody can Google you and find your information. But if they wanted to quickly get to a place and find the books, where do they need to go to purchase the books?
All my books are available on Amazon, of course, and for just overall general information about me, there's my website at lyleblackburn.com.
All right, what about some social media? Where you at? You on Facebook? You on Twitter? You on Instagram? If they wanted to contact you, where do they go?
Yep, I've got all those, Instagram, Twitter. I'm on Facebook, so if you just search Lyle Blackburn on any of those medias. And I also have a podcast called Monstro Bizarro, which is a monthly podcast where I just detail some of these cases, and all that can be found if you just search my name on whatever your preferred platform is.
Awesome sauce. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's the one and only Dog Waters. It's Lyle Blackburn. We are out of here, and I hope you guys have a wonderful, magnificent, glorious, beautiful day.